next interview is one that you might want to brace yourselves for. Now, Mary Rodwell is a former nurse and counsellor from the Midlands who claims that aliens are secretly abducting children and altering their DNA to give them special powers. Evidence, she says, can be found around the world in the form of child prodigies who she calls the star babies. Now, Mary says she's personally spoken to dozens of these children from all around the world.
They're telling me about their trips on spacecraft. They're telling me about the different kinds of beings. They were telling me about what they were learning. And these are children, often under 10. They don't watch talk shows. They don't read books on this. And they were coming out with really profound and complex information that, as a grandmother and as a mother, my children never spoke like this, and my grandchildren didn't. So what I was noticing was, and it was confounding the parents as well, because they said, how does my child know this? This isn't something I've taught them. This isn't something they've learned at school. And also having an awareness that also confronted them as well, because they would often say, they've seen spirits, or grandma is there and they could see the spirit of grandma, even though grandma had died maybe, at some point. So they had this, what I call multidimensional awareness that their parents found quite confronting, but also for the child, that was their norm.
So you spoke to one instance of this and then found more, did you?
That was what was so fascinating. Not only what the patterns of the parents' experiences were being echoed in the children, but I was finding children, and I'd had parents writing to me from Turkey, from Europe, from the States, as well as here in Australia. And the children were saying a lot of the same kinds of things. And, some of them were really young, 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old.
How did the parents react to this news? I mean, were they aware of any contacts, prior to the children voicing what was happening to them?
That was why they'd get in touch with me, is because not only did they have experiences, but they were hearing from their children things that they'd experienced as a child, but the child being a lot more aware of it and conscious, and they would write to me and say, look, Mary, I haven't talked about my experiences to my child. They're usually very responsible. They didn't want to influence the child in any way. They certainly didn't tell them about their own experiences. And yet the children will say, Mummy, the beings turned Daddy off so he couldn't, he'd go to sleep, so that then they'd pick me up, and they found it quite funny that, that the Daddy was switched off, if you like, so that the being could pick them up and take them somewhere. And they describe identically the kinds of beings that their parents and other people have described, which again is, they're not on cartoons. These kinds of beings and their descriptions were fitting many of the patterns of the research that I had been doing.
So what sort of things are they experiencing then? Can you give us some examples?
Well, some of the more common ones is talking to their parents about, at night or waking up the next day saying they've been taken sometimes through walls onto spacecraft, where they would say they would be with other human children, and some other children that didn't look quite human. I would say, well, how do they look different? They would say, well, their eyes maybe were a bit different, or they would just know that they were not the same as humans, and they would say, and there would be a being there. They might describe an ant-like being, or a praying mantis type being, or a grey with big eyes, teaching them things and showing them things. And it may be to do with physics, it may be to do with one little 8-year-old young girl was telling her mum she'd been shown things like black holes and more information on the physics of black holes and whatever. And this is an 8-year-old little girl that's explaining some of the understanding that she got from things. So they're being taught things on a very complex level up on the craft. And she's a young girl that also says she's come here to this planet to help humanity, to help people wake up and understand that we're not alone. But she's not the only one. This is one 8-year-old in the US that was talking to me only recently.
So how is this happening, Mary? I mean, does it occur when the mums are pregnant, or are the children themselves being abducted?
Or the children are going, sometimes it's the whole family, but sometimes it will be the children without the adults, and they will say that mum and dad have been put to sleep, so that they're picked up. And the interesting thing is in the difference between the parents and the children is that most of the children most often are not fearful in the way the parents were. It's almost like, you know, that this new generation is a more aware generation and one that's more comfortable with their experiences and that these multidimensional kinds of experiences. And they will say that, you know, to some of them they feel like they're family, that they're not aliens or they're not, you know, feeling abducted. They feel like part of this is consensual, that they have agreed to go, they're interested in going, that they are learning from these beings, and they will even, I mean, this isn't just one child that's told me this, that sometimes in the classroom, they will see one of the beings in the classroom with them who's basically saying some of the information you're getting isn't accurate from your human teachers, and will be given answers to some of the questions that they've been asked. And this is more than one child that's told me this.
So they can see them, but the rest of the class can't?
That's right, because they have this ability to, I mean, we only can see 1% of the, you know, the visual spectrum, but what seems to be with these children, they're a lot more psychic or a lot more intuitive, and so not only can they see spirits, and they can maybe see orbs, you know, that are being taken a lot by cameras now, you can actually see these orbs and whatever. They can sometimes see those, they can sometimes see energy fields around people as well, and also some of these beings, they're able to perceive them, and they're not confronted by it. Their issue is that when other people don't see them, they don't believe them, and so they feel very isolated in the fact that they're, you know, well, if nobody else can see them, then is it really real? And it's only if they can have the reassurance because their parents have had experiences. Otherwise, as one 8-year-old said to me when he came to speak to me about his experiences here in Queensland, he looked at me and he'd been really nervous about telling me his account and his experiences, and he looked at me and he said, "So you mean I'm not crazy?" Because that's what he believed other people thought of him.
So if we're talking numbers, and I'm sure that there are many more, that you perhaps haven't found yet or haven't found you, what numbers are we looking at here from your experience and from people that you've talked to?
Well, if I go on a 9-year-old from Europe, who I said to her how many of these children now, you know, are out there, and older generations, you know, the teenagers that I write about that have conscious memory, for example, and she was saying about 50% of the planet now is like this, only many of them get switched off through conditioning, programming at school and education, which shuts them down. So she said that's the problem, is that on this planet, in other words, we're programmed into a 3D reality, and we end up shutting down this awareness, these abilities and what have you. And this is a 9-year-old giving me statistics on this and what happens through our conditioning and programming.
That is an awful lot. You'd think that even though some is shut down, that we'd be more aware of this happening.
Well, you'd think so, but the trouble is, even with the parents, they are very quiet about talking about this, because what isn't understood is that the professional people that have had experiences that won't talk about it. And I know lawyers, I know doctors, I know psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, you know, I know politicians, I know people in the media that have had these experiences, and they will not talk about it. They will not talk about the fact that their children have this awareness because of the stigma of either the chuckle factor or the factor that professionally you don't, you know, if you're a corporate lawyer, you don't go around saying you think your kids are star kids or kids that are having experiences. You just don't do that. And I stayed for a week with someone who was a corporate lawyer recently, and you know, he knows his whole family are having experience, including the kids, but there's no way in the world that he can come out and actually say that. So this is the problem, is that, you know, generally the public isn't aware that this is a reality. So, you know, you talk about it, or if you're in a profession where you're employed, how can you possibly start to say to those around you, your peer groups, that this is your experience? And that is the problem, and this is why I've worked with over 3,000 individuals now globally, and I'm getting information from many different countries that don't speak English, including China, where I only recently, a researcher there was telling me about a 12-year-old that was doing all these strange artwork, geometric artwork, that those that have encounters will often manifest after their experiences.
Just to clarify, Mary, because there's going to be people that are listening to this now thinking, what on earth? Do you know what I mean? Because they won't have heard anything like this before. Are you saying these children are human children being taken by aliens, or are they aliens themselves?
I will say that we're all aliens because I believe through my from my research that we have been, if you like, we've been intelligently designed, and I think this happened right through our history, and it started with the indigenous tribes, even speaking about these extraterrestrials they called gods coming to Earth, and it's in the Sumerian text, for one example, where the Anunnaki, which were extraterrestrials that came to this planet and were, if you like, interbreeding with humans, but they also are saying that a lot of the other intelligences that are visiting us have had some input into our DNA, into Homo sapiens sapiens, because we have some anomalies in our DNA that many of the geneticists won't admit to, although I've spoken and heard from whistleblower geneticists that say there is no doubt that we have been, if you like, modified in some way because of the way our genes express themselves. And we have within our DNA 223 genes that are a sideways insertion of genetic material that did not come up the invertebrate phase of our evolution and are all to do with higher psychological functioning, and nobody can explain how they got there.
I'm just going to bring Brett in for a minute, because Brett is, listening and looking at... You've got something to say on this, haven't you, Brett?
Sure, Mary, before we go any further, can we just clarify the star children, or the star babies as you have dubbed them? Can you just explain exactly what qualities they have that make them different from, quote-unquote, a normal child?
The difference is that they, and I've written a lot about this in my book, The New Human, which is out soon, is the fact that they have conscious memory not only of their past lives on other planets. They will talk about these visitors, or these aliens, as many people call them, as their family, their star family. They will also talk about the fact that they go up on spacecraft where their star family and these beings actually teach them things. And they will also know their abilities. They are shown how to use certain abilities on the spacecraft, and they talk about using their third eye, learning how to levitate, learning how to use energy for healing, how they can discern different types of spirits from other types of entities. So all the things we think are the weird and wonderful things, psychic, intuition, clairvoyance, a lot of them are actually telepathic. And one of the emails that I remember which was quite compelling, was a mother writing to me about her 3-year-old daughter, and said that her daughter had been telepathic from birth. She knew she was reading her mind, and she said, the trouble is she's reading the mind of everyone around us, and they're all getting freaked out. She says, my biggest problem is that she's 3 years old now and she's still doing it, and I have to watch everything that I think because I know my daughter's picking up on it. So a lot of these children are actually telepathic as well, and they will tell me that they'll know what the teacher's thinking, they'll know what other people around them are thinking, and they will even be able to tap into their emotions and people's, not only the thoughts, but their emotions as well. And they find it very, very difficult and very confronting because, other people are different. And I said to one 8-year-old, do you ever talk about this at school? And she said, no, I can't, because they would never understand.
Now, you've touched on it already, but to clarify, do you have proof of your claims, like DNA, for example?
This is the one thing that we're actually looking for now, because a number of people, including adults, have been told their DNA is different. And we've got to find out what is it that we're looking for that makes them a hybrid, an upgraded hybrid rather than the rest of us, which I think we're all hybrids anyway. But we need to know what it is that's in their DNA that we can identify that will actually show us this. But that requires money, that requires, the right research equipment. And what we're doing at the moment is doing the surveys to actually get the evidence for this that is going on. But not only that, we want also the tangibility in terms of the DNA side of it as well. So, you know, the problem is always, isn't it, is getting the right people and getting the funding and knowing what we're looking for. And this is what ultimately we hope to do.
Mary, going back briefly just to the concept of the star children and the way you describe them in terms of what they can do. Caroline used the phrase child prodigy earlier, and I don't think anyone would deny that child prodigies throughout history, children or people born way above the average person, Einstein, Beethoven, etc.
Yeah.
How long do you think this has been going on for?
Oh, I think it's been going on right from the get-go, right through through our history, our human history. But what I have become aware of is it's almost like there's been a shift, an acceleration of that. And some people believe, and I think they may very well be right, is that as we got to a certain technological age where, you know, we developed the weapons to destroy the planet, for example, they were probably looking at us and saying we've really got to do something about the consciousness of this planet, because at the moment, you know, it's like handing a 3-year-old a loaded gun. And we need to get them into growing up and being mature adults if they're going to come into space. So there seems to be this acceleration of that, and part of that acceleration, and this is going to confront a lot of people that are listening, is some of those programs are ADHD, and those with Asperger's, those with dyslexia, and those with some forms of autism. Because we've isolated that now, and I've got 2 molecular biologists that believe this as well, from their understanding that these are the parts of the new human. And the reason that they appear dysfunctional is because they don't operate so well in a 3D limited reality, because they are operating more multidimensionally. And this is what I've also written about, is that one molecular biologist, Dr. Lena Olsen from Sweden, has actually called them letter people, and she's one of them. And she said she was, you know, considered mildly autistic, but also with ADHD. And she said it's not faulty genes. It's just that they are more multidimensionally aware, and we don't understand it. So what do? We shut them down with, you know, if it's ADHD, and we stick Ritalin down their faces so they can operate slower and be programmed into 3D, whereas these intelligences want us now to move into our more multidimensional awareness, and that is why they're these new programs that are not operating in the program of 3D anymore, and this is what we're not understanding.
Mary, just to be clear, are you saying that children who are autistic or with ADHD are alien abductees?
I am saying that they are the new programs, not all autism, because some of it I think may have come from other things, but the ones that are born autistic, we're discovering now that they have extra genes, and they are often telepathic. And there's been research done in America with one of the doctors, and I've got it all in my new book, where she is noticing that with autism, and it's becoming more and more interesting, that they appear to be telepathic, and that's not been understood. Before, it's just there's something wrong with them, they're not operating well, it's dysfunction, but actually it's because we're not understanding that they are, you know, we're looking at reality through the eye of a needle, and they are actually looking at a room of information where we're literally looking at it through this tiny little porthole, and we think that's reality. Well, they are getting sensations and awareness and information in huge amounts, and they're trying to make sense of that in the limited way that we're trying to get them to appreciate it. They are literally moving us into a whole new awareness, and we're the ones with the foot on the back.